Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and a very warm welcome to you all from wherever you are joining us today. My name is Mary O'Shea. I'm the Technical Advisor for Information and Media with IREX, and I am delighted to be moderating today's panel, which is co-hosted by UNESCO and Forbidden Stories. The topic of today's panel is how can investigative journalism survive in a hostile world? And by way of introduction, just a few words. When we talk about investigative journalism, we are really talking about what is at the heart, the core mission of journalism. It is through investigative journalism that reporters hold power to account, expose wrongdoing, and indeed mobilize accountability. Fundamentally, what we are talking about is investigative journalism's role in upholding the integrity of a democracy, but also in defending our democracies against creeping authoritarianism. It is now 15 years, year on year, that we are seeing a decline in democracy worldwide. And so fighting for the facts has never been quite so urgent. Because what we know is that it is all too true that where and when investigative journalism is most needed is exactly when and where investigative journalism is most under attack. Before going ahead, I would just actually like to give the floor to Laurent Richard, who is the director and founder of Forbidden Stories, just to say a few words as the host of this panel.
Yes, thank you, Mary, and thank you all to be there, and thank you for the audience to attend this meeting on investigative journalism. So happy to see all the panelists here. You are all representing people who are fighting every day to make sure that people and public opinion get access to the information. And the title of this panel is "How to Survive in this Very Hostile World Against Journalism." And I know that you have your experience, your life, your daily life, your vision will really help us to know what are the solutions in a world where leaders can describe sometimes journalists as the enemy of the people. So they're very happy to take part of this conversation with you all.
Thank you, Laurent. And indeed, we have a really great group of panelists today. We have Maria Ressa will also be joining us in a few minutes. She's jumping off another panel. So yes, I mean, none of our panelists today actually need introductions, but there are formalities to be followed. So I will do a quick round of introductions. Then we will have a conversation for around 40 minutes, followed by a Q&A. So do please feel free in the course of our discussion to just post your questions in the chat, and the Forbidden Stories team will be sifting through them, and we will get to a selection of them towards the end. So just to say, as Laurent mentioned, you know, we will be tackling the big picture issues and the big challenges, but very much the conversation will be grounded in the personal experiences of our panelists, who obviously bring immense experience and to this topic. So we look forward to hearing from them. Oh, and we have Maria Ressa just joining, right on time. Okay, so a very quick round of introductions. I'm really going to gallop through this somewhat. Maria Ressa, I'm going to start with you, so your timing is impeccable. Maria Ressa is an investigative journalist and media executive with a career spanning over 30 years. She is the co-founder and CEO of Rappler, an online media outlet based in the Philippines. And prior to founding Rappler in 2012, was the lead investigative journalist for CNN for the Asia region for over 20 years. She was also the bureau chief for CNN in Manila and Jakarta. If I was to list all of the awards Maria has won in recent years, I would probably use up most of the time left that we have for this panel. So I'm just going to flag two things. One is that in 2018, Maria was one of Time Magazine's Persons of the Year in recognition of her firmly pushing back against media intimidation. And the second thing I'll mention, which was just announced, I think just 2 days ago, is that Maria is going to be the recipient of the 2021 UNESCO Guillermo Cano World Freedom Prize, which is a huge honor and absolutely well-deserved. So huge congratulations, Maria.
Thank you. Thank you. It is so good. And I'm sorry I ran from another panel, but it's so good to see our gender balanced panel. No, hello.
Hello.
Great. Okay, so next I'm going to come, I'm following the order of my screen here. I'm David Kaplan, who is the Executive Director of the Global Investigative Journalism Network, an international association in support of investigative journalism with 211 member organizations, of which I'm happy to report my organization is one, with a presence in over 82 countries globally. David has worked as an investigative journalist for over 40 years, and indeed has actually been instrumental in developing the model of non-profit investigative journalist newsroom that we will be talking quite a bit today about, I believe. Next, I would like to introduce Maria Teresa Ronderos, who is an investigative journalist, as well as the director and co-founder of the Latin America Center for Investigative Journalism, otherwise known by its Spanish acronym CLIP. CLIP was established in 2019, so it's soon to be 2 years of age, and coordinates cross-border investigations across the Latin America region. Prior to establishing CLIP, Maria Teresa was director of the Independent Journalism Programme at the Open Society Foundation. She was based in London, where I had the pleasure to meet her previously. And before that, had a long career as a renowned journalist in her home country of Colombia. One thing to note is that Maria Teresa has, throughout her career, been a press freedom advocate, and today currently serves on the boards of the Committee to Protect Journalists, the Gabo Foundation, and the Media Development Investment Fund. I'm sure there's probably others, but as I said, time is limited today. Next, we have Rowan Dayman, who is a filmmaker and director of the Arab Reporters for Investigative Journalism Network, which is based in Amman, Jordan. So it was founded in 2005 and is dedicated to promoting investigative journalism across the Arab world with a strong focus on fact-based accountability journalism and empowering journalists to fulfill their role as watchdogs of public interest. Rowan has over 20 years experience in media management, digital production, and previously served as the senior commissioning editor with Al Jazeera. Last but certainly not least, we have Laurent Richard, who is an award-winning documentary filmmaker, producer, and of course, founder of Forbidden Stories, a network which is dedicated to keeping alive the stories of investigative journalists who find themselves under threat. Laurent has directed investigative documentaries for over 20 years, and in 2018 was named European Journalist of the Year. Since its creation, just 3 years ago, Forbidden Stories has been the recipient of numerous prestigious awards for the outstanding work that they have been doing, including the 2021 Investigative Journalism for Europe Impact Award and the 2020 George Polk Award for the Cartel Project, which I think we'll hear about a little bit later on. So yeah, I'm just actually going to jump straight in, mindful of the time, and kick off for questions. So Maria, I'm going to start with you, actually. A question that I guess we've been thinking, you know, Rappler has been under pretty much relentless pressure and subject to countless threats since 2016, both online and off. And you oversee a large newsroom and you have a number of staff, and you're obviously operating in a very heightened environment. And we were talking a few days ago. I was just sort of wondering, how do you reassure your staff? How do you keep your staff on board working in this very highly pressured environment? And I guess if you've had to put in place any measures to, you know, to sort of ease that pressure on them.
Yeah, a lot. You know, so we, and I guess each step, so where do I begin? I will try to, so first, we acknowledged exactly that we were under attack. and we talked about it. We opened up. We had monthly general assemblies, actually, which we tried to keep as safe as possible. Early on in 2016, we offered counseling to our reporters and our social media. Look, Rappler's small compared to ABS-CBN, the largest network in the Philippines that had 1,000 journalists. I used to manage that. Rappler's about 100, 120, and we're 63% women, not by design, and the median age is 23 years old. Right? So we looked at counseling because the attacks on social media they're unprecedented for me, and I've been around since, this is my 35th year as a journalist. The second one was security. And I consulted folks on this panel, how do you deal with things like this? And that we increase security 6 times. Beyond that, I'll say this one thing, which is you have to let go of the way you used to run news groups, which is to keep information centralized, right? What we did is we decentralized, like the internet, and did little clusters. And each manager was in charge of clusters. And the other way I think about it is, since essentially we're facing terrorist attacks on social media, we have cells to fight back. And then we also broke it down into buddy systems. And all of these things that we had set up before to deal with the attacks that were coming from government at that point in time, we didn't know if the police would be helpful to us or would, anyway, let me not go there. But they all became very, very helpful when the pandemic hit. So the other part is, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. We were in many ways prepared for the pandemic. Third is the last one, which is mission. The mission of journalism, the purpose of journalism. I think globally, tech platforms became the new gatekeepers, abdicated responsibility. News organizations have largely maintained, right? We keep doing that. And there are many people on this panel who do the same thing. So kudos.
Thank you. And I mean, have staff left because they just, found it too pressurized?
It's interesting because in 2017, which is when 2016, the online attacks began bottom up. A lie told a million times becomes a fact, right? So we were targeted because we exposed the propaganda machine. 2017, when President Duterte attacked us top down in his State of the Nation address, I did a General Assembly almost right after that. And I actually told our folks, we're moving into a different time period. If you want to resign, nothing against you. You didn't sign up for this. Because the other thing is, when you're going into battle, you better have people who are ready for battle. You want to have people who are prepared for this. So we had a General Assembly and we talked about it. And I offered, we offered to write and to help place them in other news organizations. And I am so thrilled that not one reporter, no one in our editorial team did, but we had 4 people who did take this, and they were in tech and sales. Nothing to, but I'm just saying the mission of journalism carries you through.
Well, that is good to hear. And I mean, indeed, the sort of online violence against journalists, and especially female journalists, as you mentioned, that 63% of the staff are female. I mean, it's pervasive and with very real life consequences. So yeah, I'm impressed as ever. Laurent, I'm going to come to you next. I've had the pleasure of being on panels with you before. And one thing I remember that you talking about in Perugia at the International Journalism Festival was this idea of collaboration as a form of protection. And indeed, collaboration it's obviously, built into the DNA of Forbidden Stories. So I would just actually like to hear, why do you see collaboration as a form of protection? And is this a way, in a sense, that investigative journalism reinvents itself? Sorry, Laurent, you're on mute.
I need to activate it. Sorry. Yeah, as you say, I really think that's the DNA of Forbidden Stories, is exactly that point, that collaboration brings protection. Because when we are continuing the work of Regina Martinez, who was killed in Mexico in 2012, we were 60 journalists from coordinated by Forbidden Stories. Some people were working for the Washington Post, other ones for the Guardian, other for Le Monde, and nobody can stop that. And nobody can. And if one is killed, you have 59 other reporters ready to take over. So Forbidden Stories is really based on that idea of this kind of collaborative journalism, where we try to sort of think about with the mindset of the killer, with the mindset of the enemy of the press freedom, that they sometimes, at some point, they do not care at all about statements, but they really care about having their own crimes exposed everywhere in the planet. So what they wanted to silence in Mexico, or what they wanted to silence in Malta, we have to expose those stories in Nairobi, in New York, in Rio de Janeiro, and everywhere. And so that's the main idea of the collaboration. That the collaboration is not only bringing protection, it's also bringing much more impact to information, because you make sure that more viewers or more readers will access to that. And so what is the most important thing is that you have a better information, a better quality for the information, because it's much more fact-checked. You don't have only one journalist on one sentence, but you have 60 journalists who have do a very long work on fact-checking every information. So at the end, for the public interest, that kind of collaborative work, international collaboration, cross-border work could really benefit to the public opinion, I think. Are you muted? Yeah.
Indeed. Okay, so I guess just, also in a way, is collaboration a way of spreading the risk across a larger group of people rather than having it sort of centralized in one or two journalists taking forward a story?
Yes, absolutely. It's when we, for example, when we are making the request to some company or to some people that we know that they are dangerous, we do the interview request on behalf of a group of journalists. So in that way, we are already sending a strong signal that this is not only one journalist asking you one question. This is really a group of journalists. So don't even think about stopping them, or don't even think about the best way to make censorship on that. So yes, I think it's creating protection. In the meantime, we have to be very careful, because when we are going on the field, on a dangerous field, sometimes being 6 or 7 journalists on the same field could endanger more. So we have to be very careful, and that's why every time we are running an investigation like that is always complex, where you all the time have the killer free. When we are starting an investigation with Forbidden Stories, the killer is still free, and already killed. So we have to be very cautious and to take the time. And one of the key things to make that investigation happen is really to have the time for doing that. And that's maybe the most precious thing, is that trust and time. Trust from the partners we are working with, trust with Mexican reporters we are working with, and you need to build a strong relationship and to work with them first. They know much more than us the rules and the danger, and the time to make the things properly, and to avoid and to assess the risk all the time.
And so I'd actually love to hear a little bit more about the cartel project, which is obviously your most recent investigation project. And just to sort of maybe just go into a little bit more detail of how that collaboration worked.
Basically, it's so the work of Forbidden Stories is to coordinate a global effort of many newsrooms at the same time, and make sure that at the end, every newspaper will publish its own article, its own pieces on the very same day. So we have a team of 12 people at Forbidden Stories. San Rodrigo is coordinating this supra newsroom with 60 journalists and 25 news organizations. And we do have a team of 6-7 investigative reporters who are going on the field, finding news sources, finding documentation, and this is how we work. And we decide to work with a Proceso, that is an excellent investigative newspaper, weekly newspaper in Mexico, and to know exactly what we can do and how we can how we can continue the work. So we have two missions in mind. The first one is to investigate the killing of the journalist, and the other one is to continue the work of the journalist. So we have to collect the evidence about the killing. We have to know more about the threats he or she was receiving, but we have also to find a way to continue the work. That's how we went to China, how we went to many parts of the world to investigate the drug cartels who are operating not only in Mexico, of course, but in many parts of the world.
Of course. I believe, Laurent, that you have a clip that you would like to show, I believe, of the court.
Yeah.
Okay.
En México, nada detiene la violencia en contra de los periodistas.
La reportera fue encontrada en su baño con huellas de golpes y asfixia.
Se convertía en un elemento incómodo absolutamente para ciertos poderes.
Nosotros no éramos corresponsales de guerra, la guerra vino a nosotros.
Te das cuenta de que la justicia mexicana pareciera que no existe. Nos siguen matando y no pasa nada.
Lo más peligroso, exhibir los vínculos entre política y narcotráfico, la narcopolítica.
We have to mix all the database to have a correct idea.
I think there is not another collaborative project more dangerous than this one.
El narco está conectado a muchas partes.
¿Y eso qué marca es?
Los químicos que están utilizando.
Yo lo consigo de Vietnam.
We have one person in China who can check the factory.
Si Regina hubiera publicado esa información, hubiera sido una bomba para el gobierno.
Desde hace 8 meses, 25 medios en el mundo investigamos la violencia contra los periodistas en México. ¿Cómo estar seguros de que realmente se va a frenar esta guerra contra los periodistas en México, presidente?
Thank you for that, Laurent, and very, very impressive. I guess, David, I would like to come to you next. And obviously, you know, Mexico, incredibly dangerous, high-risk place to be working as an investigative journalist. I'm conscious you've been working as an investigative journalist and also supporting investigative journalism for, you know, 40 plus years. And I'm interested to see how you've have seen those threats evolve. It's clearly a much dangerous time to be a journalist, and we know that journalists are directly being targeted for the work they do. So, particularly taking, I guess, the idea of collaboration. You know, increased collaboration is increased communication, which in itself, you know, it poses some risks. And David, I've heard you speak before about being in a technological arms race almost to try and keep pace with the change. I would just love to hear from you, you know, both personally and also from the perspective of GIJN, how you've adapted as these threats have been evolving.
Okay, let's try that again. Thank you, Mary. Thanks to UNESCO and to Forbidden Stories. Great to see so many good friends over the years. Great question. I think it's important to understand how the threat has changed over the years. They used to just try and kill us. And there's a great quote from Zafar Abbas, the editor of Dawn in Pakistan. He said that they're not trying to kill us anymore, they're trying to kill journalism. And there's a difference. If you look at the data from the Committee to Protect Journalists. Well, we're actually at a 20-year low in journalist killings. That's good. It shows progress of a sort. But if you step back and understand, well, you know, what's really going on. Well, first of all, there's still 25, 30 deaths a year, and 90% of those go unsolved. That's why Forbidden Stories work is so important. But we're on the front lines of this global backlash, not only against independent media, but against human rights and democracy generally. And the journalists are right there with human rights campaigners bearing the brunt of this. But they're not trying to assassinate us as much as they used to. They're trying to assassinate journalism. They're going after us with lawsuits, with online trolls, particularly women journalists. They're using national security laws. They're using intimidation. There's a whole toolkit, some of it fairly blunt and traditional, some of it very new and high tech, that they're using to try and excuse me, to destroy our craft and our profession. Let me add a more positive note. But part of the backlash is because we're having an impact. We have more journalists in more places today with better tools, asking tougher questions than ever before. And the autocrats and oligarchs do not like this. A bunch of the pushback, I mean, there is this global backlash, and we're bearing the brunt of that. But a lot of the backlash is because we're doing more in more places than ever before. And our panel here is testimony to that. If you look at the brilliant work of Arij in the Middle East, and Clip in Latin America, and Rappler in Southeast Asia, Forbidden Stories, global work, this is extraordinary. And these networks did not exist even 10 years ago. So the technology has caused us a lot of pain and difficulty. It's also been our greatest asset. Today we can do investigations on a global basis with collaborative software. There are ways to secure it. There are ways to encrypt your communications. There are common sense ways to protect yourselves. And we can get an entire bank's records on a single thumb drive. This is extraordinary. And it's much harder to keep a secret today, even in Putin's Russia. So you have to weigh all these horrible developments of surveillance technology and online harassment against the fact that we have some tech in our corner as well. That's helping us not exactly even the playing field, but it's giving us a fighting chance. We are in a kind of technological arms race, but you know what? The good guys, in some ways, are catching up. When globalization happened, when we got cell phones and the internet and containerization and trade opened up worldwide, the bad guys went international immediately. And they've been able to move immense amounts of money and people and contraband literally at the push of a button. The good guys, you know, the cops don't work across borders, and you know, these kleptocracies and corruption really has become a whole different phenomenon today under globalization. The good guys are finally catching up, like Forbidden Stories, like Clip, like Arij, like Rappler. We're starting to link up in much more profound ways than ever before. And that is indeed a threat to those who commit abuses of power.
Well, that's good to hear. Maria Teresa Ronderos, I would like to come to you now. I think you bring such a variety of perspectives, having worked, obviously, you know, as an investigative journalist, having worked on the donor side with OSF, and now setting up the, you know, Clip. So I guess what I'm just really interested in hearing about is that when you left OSF a few years back, why did you choose to set up a non-profit investigative organization rather than perhaps go back into sort of more traditional media sector?
Well, I think, Mary, for all the reasons that David and Laurent and Maria just explained, there was a little bit of family and personal stuff. But at OSF, even though it was a wonderful, wonderful experience, I felt like I was watching everybody eat ice cream and I couldn't eat any. and that was too painful. Like I was helping everybody do the real interesting on the trenches work. And I've been a journalist all my life, an investigative journalist for at least 15 years before I went to OSF. So I felt, oh no, this is fine, but this is not my life. My life is investigative journalism. So I went back, and then we saw it was missing, like David was saying. There was no real connection between journalists in Latin America. I mean, there are efforts. I don't say there weren't, because that would be, not recognizing people who have already done things. But there wasn't really like a promoter, let's say, like somebody who would bring together a team and connect everybody and also enable projects that were already on the way. So Laurent and I worked in a beautiful project that was actually a group of Mexican journalists that we cannot even name today because it was so dangerous that they couldn't put their names to it, investigating the death of a journalist in Mexico. And we come together, and what did we do? One of the key things is to, the name of the journalist is Miroslava Bridge. So we had to accompany them. So the beauty of cross-border investigative journalism is that you never feel alone. You never feel lonely. So you are doing probably the most dangerous or the most crazy thing that you would never think you would do. And you do it because you don't feel lonely. You don't feel you're on your own. You feel a whole network of people supporting you. And so we've been going into, the crossing of religion and narco traffic and money laundering, which is very difficult to tap in. And we did it because we were all together and we felt we had each other's back. But also I went back because of what David's already said. I saw that technology, and from London I could see it very clearly. Technology for investigative reporting was like going into a candy store, going back to my metaphor of ice cream. It was like open source. I took a course on open source investigative journalism while I was there, data journalism. It was just like, oh my God, I can't believe I have all of these and I'm missing all of these. So I went back to Latin America, and that's what we're doing. We're doing cross-border, we're doing data journalism. We did one of the most amazing, most rewarding stories. Let's say we tracked down the whole trip of migrants from Africa and Asia into Latin America to go to the US and Canada. And this was a story that was like hidden, that was like not seen. There was news here and there. And we tracked it and showed how it happened, why it happened. The 14 or 15,000 men and women and children from Africa and from Asia come every year through whole Latin America. They suffer the most horrendous situations. And we work together with reporters from Cameroon, from Bangladesh, from India, from Nepal, because the migrants took us there. We are a Latin American center. We work within Latin American reporters, and of course there were a lot of Latin American reporters in this project. But we felt like, but the stories took us there, because when the Indians were extradited or deported from Mexico, we had to go to India and ask in India what happened to them after they were deported. What happened to the body of Emmanuel, when he was killed in the coast of Chiapas, when he was sent back in a coffin to his hometown in Douala in Cameroon. So these are the stories that now technology and cross-border and investigative journalism can lead you to, that you couldn't do before, that it was too difficult or too complicated. I was at the very beginning of the ICIJ saga. I was part of that team that started the cross-border investigative journalism, almost on tobacco, on the smuggling of cigarettes. And I remember those days, David, we had to send things by DHL, the package of paper by DHL. We didn't have entity extraction. We didn't have any of that. We had to read tons. And yet we did have PGP. We did have encryption of those days. So it was too good to miss, basically, and I tell you, I don't miss my old job at all. I liked it. Well, it lasted. It was beautiful, but while I am right here, it's like too good. We've been doing amazing work, and we've already worked with about 60 investigative reporting outlets throughout Latin America. Without counting the ones abroad, like with Laurent, that they were fantastic in supporting and helping us and also connecting with us with this Miroslava story. And I think in that conversation, Laurent, after the Miroslava story, I think you came up with that idea of the next one, of the Regina Martinez story.
Yeah, it was obvious that we needed to investigate in Mexico, because when we think about journalists under threat, of course, we already immediately think about journalists being killed in Mexico, and with a high level of impunity. As David said, I think there is more than 99% of the killing who are still unsolved. So the killer are still free, unidentified. So one way to fight impunity is to do journalism.
I've one sort of open question, or a follow-up question, Maria Teresa. I guess in a way, right, it feels like traditional news publishers no longer dominate investigative journalism, right? Some of the most interesting reporting possibly is happening maybe. And, is that correct? I mean, should we be worried potentially that investigative journalism is being slightly squeezed out of newsrooms?
I don't think we should be worried. I think like David, I think it's on the contrary. I think it's not being squeezed out, at least not in my part of the world. I think it's being squeezed in. I think we didn't have as much investigative journalism in Latin America as we have today. Because the traditional media outlets, some of them did have, especially Brazil, some in Argentina, some in Mexico, and Colombia. But most journalists, traditional outlets didn't have investigative journalism, didn't do any investigative journalism. They were like mainstream, decent, some of them, a lot of them very close to power, too close for comfort. And now there's this, array of small investigative journalism outlets. Some of them have grown already, like Animal Político in Mexico, for example, and they're doing investigations all across Latin America. Like David said, I've never seen, investigative journalism so buoyant and so vibrant. The difficult part is to get the money to support them, but they're managing. Somehow the passion, like Maria said, mission drives. So they they find a way to do it. And I do think that some of the big outlets are, on the contrary, are now realizing that when award times come, they don't win any awards. They don't have anything. So awards are playing that good part because they're showing that the big outlets, that they should be doing investigative journalism. And I've seen in my part of the world some big outlets that never did investigative journalism actually creating investigative units, because they see they're not producing the kind of journalism that people would pay for. And since they are asking people to pay for their outlets and people won't pay for anything, I mean, for receiving just ordinary regular news. So They go out and they start producing better quality journalism, and they're becoming, some of them, really much better investigative journalists. So I do think that it's actually changing for the best, not for the worst. I think the panorama in the north, in the US or Europe, could be a little bit different because there was a big tradition there of investigative journalism.
But Mary, if I can just interject something. There were never any good old days for investigative journalism. It's always been a struggle. If you go up against powerful people and institutions, you're never going to have it easy. And if you go back 100 years to the people who pioneered our field, they were under attack constantly. You know, there was a really interesting study done in Europe about 15 years ago about where investigative journalism was being practiced. And they found that big papers with lots of resources, it was no indicator of investigative journalism. The real indicators were leadership in the newsroom and a willingness to tolerate and manage risk. Those were the keys, and that's what we're seeing in places around the world, exemplified by Rappler and Arij and so many others.
Thank you, David. Actually, I would like to come to Arij. Rowan, I wanted to ask you about, something we've noticed over the last year is that many governments around the world have used the COVID-19 pandemic as a pretext, right, to crack down on the media. And to some extent, COVID-19 is fast becoming a human rights crisis, with journalists operating in increasingly restricted sort of environments in terms of freedom of expression and the disproportionate measures that have been put in place. And we know that temporary measures have a nasty habit of staying quite a long time, like lasting the emergency, so to speak. I'm curious to hear about, in your region, how is the pandemic, how has COVID-19 impacted on the investigative journalists you have supported in their ability to operate, and also how Arij is providing support to these journalists?
Thanks a lot, Mary. It's very difficult to speak after role models in our panel, and thanks to UNESCO and Forbidden Stories for bringing us all together. I can feel the energy, and you can feel this passion and energy that, we are a bit crazy as investigative journalists, I think. If you calculate it, even after all the risk assessments, what we are doing is crazy, but we don't announce it, we don't say it. And when we see others in other regions doing the same, we feel that's fine. Then we are not as crazy as we are. In the Arab governments, I think they used this pandemic as a golden opportunity to get in their drawers. I'm sure they had all those ready to go, and they use the pandemic to implement. Some in the Arab countries even legalized this, and it will be permanent. It will not be, and this is a new fight that we need to fight. Misinformation, disinformation is flooding, and some governments are part of this misinformation, disinformation. So in the pandemic was really, really big, and no access to information as well. I'll give you one just small example. In Jordan, where we have a law for access to information, in Tunisia, in Jordan, for example, in Lebanon, in other countries, there is no law to access. But in Jordan, we have the law. We applied 3 times as Arij, Arab Reporters for Investigative Journalism. 20 times we applied in 2020 for access to information to different ministries. And so we got only 3 replies out of the 20 requests we applied. So on a tangible thing, on the big picture, it's really, I have been in this career for 20 years. I would say 2020 was the worst in terms of using the pandemic for suppression. On a tangible level, you can very easily notice it. Over half of our Egyptian journalists are asking to publish not in their names. This percentage never happened before. We have serious issues in Algeria, in Yemen, in Iraq, in Sudan. 2 of our journalists were fired from their full-time job because of working on the investigations. And over half of the journalists who now work with us, we have, a huge community. We have over 4,000 journalists of our Arij community, because we have been functioning for the last 15 years. And many of the journalists became freelancers in 2020. So basically, there's a big shift into this. There are a lot of new challenges that we never experienced before. For example, I used to tell our journalists that I can fly to them and be there in any country in the region within few hours. So I'll jump into the plane and be there. I cannot do this anymore. That sense of being there for them and the sense of relocation of our journalists, because we used to relocate them when the story is being published to protect them. This is never, now with the lockdowns, no airports, no airplanes, all the geography is locked. The governments are utilizing this because they know we cannot relocate the journalists anymore. And the surveillance, the digital, control is really huge, because at the end, we are using all the encrypted signal and all the ways, but it's very difficult to convince sources to speak in the digital world where we cannot reach them. And another big problem I think we in the region, and I'm sure in other regions, are facing is the psychological problems. At the end, we as investigative journalists are field creatures. As the fish doesn't live unless it's in the sea, we cannot live but in the field. So just these controls that happened, affected us very much. So we needed as Arij to be much more with our journalists psychologically, change our risk assessment for physical, health-wise, because of the pandemic, digital and all of that. So we used to do, for example, digital workshops. Now we are doing clinics one-to-one, which is much more resources, time-wise, budget and all of that, but there's no other way to protect them. And there is also, because of the new needs, became new opportunities. So we started the Arab Fact Checkers Network, which is much more needed now. I would claim that fact checkers will be targeted as much as investigative journalists in the very near future, because they are exposing especially what's happening much quicker than us. We spend sometimes 6 months, sometimes 3 years doing one investigation. But for fact checkers, it's much quicker, much smaller scale, of course, but they will be targeted. We have noticed this in the region very recently. And also the online harassment, especially for investigative female journalists and female journalists in general, became much more harder. And this is why Arij, even we initiated I Will Not Stay Silent project to help our journalists in terms of awareness and in terms of investigating the claims and how to deal with that, because even some politicians slash the sectors that is connected to the power use this to suppress small newsrooms on initiating problems like this. But I mean, today I'm sure your question opened big problems that we are facing, but because it's our celebration today, it's the World Press Freedom Day, I think it's important to tell everybody why we are continuing like this, why we are doing all of that, because of the impact we noticed when good things come out. For example, we did an investigation in Yemen, and how is the war in Yemen, and Wa'el Sharha, a Yemeni investigative journalist, found out that there is serious problem in the judges dealing with prisoners in Yemen, where prisoners stay there for years without any sentence, without any charge. We did this investigation, we published the investigation, and immediately after there was a big talk in the Yemeni society, and this reached the court, like council, and it at the end 1,600 prisoners from the central prison in Eb governance were released because of this investigation, and 2 judges were transferred to accountability and council. So when you think about it, that at the end there were people who got freed because of the work we do, I think this gives us the courage to continue and say, whatever the challenges are, let's always focus on the good things we can do.
Right, thank you very much, Rowan. Maria, I'm going to kind of slightly more quick fire questions, and then I'm going to go to Q&A. Maria, when we spoke last week, you mentioned that actually the pandemic brought out Rappler's strengths. And I'm just curious why you believe that to be the case.
I use this thing of what happens when you're under intense pressure. That's how you form diamonds underground, right? I think we've been under attack this is our 5th year. And the very same things that we put in place to deal with the attacks of government, the attacks online, and then the legal attacks and the potential violence that could come. Because, we all know online violence doesn't stay online. I talk about it, especially with social media being the way our reporting, our facts are being distributed, and the platform themselves designed to prioritize lies over facts. So there's a bias against facts and a bias against journalists. So in this environment, one of the things that we learned to do was to cluster, to come bottom up organizationally, to create, but I talked to you about the buddy system, right? So we had put all of these things working from home. Well, we had far worse case scenarios. And when the pandemic lockdown happened, we were prepared. Our Palace reporter was banned from the Palace in February 2018. We had just started the drillings of the worst case scenarios, and she had just worked out the workflow for how to pull out her phone and go live quickly with two clicks. 3 days before she was actually banned. So we had all these worst case scenarios. Most of them involved being able to communicate when you're not in the same place. When the pandemic hit, we kicked into it. It was very easy. We also were born online. And then I'd say the second thing is 2018 was it's a miracle we survived 2018, because when the government attacks you, it's a war of attrition. And it creates fear among advertisers, for example, among people reading your site, and it takes away money. So 2018 was also the year that Facebook, the Cambridge Analytica scandal, the way Facebook reacted to that was actually shutting down any of the APIs so you could see what was happening in Facebook. And then the other part was they said, well, look, since news groups are a problem, we'll just keep it in groups that are family and friends. That's why disinformation spread faster and further, and news organizations were weakened further because all of us saw a drop in traffic coming from Facebook, right? So that was the year that the government tried to shut us down, take away our license to operate, January. So by April, that was also a year of 11 cases that they investigated. We won some of them. By April, we dropped 49% of our advertising revenue. They were afraid. So the journalists had to come together and say, how are we going to survive this, right? And I don't really, while you have to be able to survive it yourself. And so what we did is we took what we were doing for ourselves, tech and data, and looking at disinformation networks, it was like other companies come under attack. So what have we learned as investigative journalists? How can we productize that for other companies? So our advertisers who were scared to advertise needed the service, needed the product, and that was what we grew in 2018. And by the end of 2019, that revenue stream grew 2,000%. So I go back, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. I mean, you seem to have the trajectory seems to have, in a way worked in your favor. I'm going to go to we've got a number of questions in Q&A and very limited time at this stage. But one I'm going to flag, so this is for all. What advice would you give an under-resourced and small news outlet that wants to do more investigative reporting? Who would like to take that?
Dave.
Pardon?
That would be for Dave. He's the expert.
You could start with GIJN's resource center,
okay.
And that in turn will lead you to all the groups represented here, most of whom are members or will be. We've got lots of tips and tools. We publish in 11 languages a day on social media. We're the network of the networks, and this is a good starting point. It's not the end point. It's the start to finding what you need to do. And again, it's not about how big you are. It's about how enterprising you are and about how you manage risk.
Okay, thank you. Maria Teresa, something I've heard you talk about before, and it's slightly linked to your ice cream metaphor, but you talked about talking about no, but this sort of, this sort of disrupted or polluted information ecosystem that we operate in, and we all have to learn to navigate. And you talked about societies needing good journalism, because if you only eat junk food, you get sick. And the same happens to societies if they only consume junk information. So what for you, very briefly, would constitute a good information diet?
Well, a good information diet would be, first of all, not have one source of information, compare and contrast. Second of all, be part of a community that you trust. There is a community, if you live in the Philippines and you trust Rappler, be part of that community, or Clip in Latin America, or your local newspaper. You can be part of several communities. And I do think that that people who find a community, they realize that today having a good information diet is not just receiving information, it's participating. It's also being able to provide good information to this community and also demand good information. So I think that is exactly that. Now, also combine local news with national, international, but mostly always read at least one good investigative piece a month, let's say, once at least, because that, or read or look or watch or whatever, with whatever shape it comes, because that really takes you down to a deeper level. A lot of the public discussions is very, very thin, no? And then when you go inside a topic and really, really understand it, but also when you hold power to account, then people get a sense of power to, oh, you can do something about it. It's a little bit what David was saying. Part of what we want to do in the cross-border field is to have a bigger impact and to reach people that don't see the news, because there's so much news that people get confused. So so a way to really have an impact is to be part of this, and support this kind of community of producing good, deep, and journalism that holds power to account, which is, I think, the indispensable journalism. Journalism has to be about that, about holding power to account. So I would tell people, don't read too much communiques of the government and what so-and-so said and so-and-so answered and blah, blah, blah. Read more who's holding power to account, who's making government more transparent, who's doing what a Rich was doing, sending 20 or 50 FOIAs until you get an answer. So that's the journalism that will really make you as a citizen feel much more powerful.
Right, thank you very much for that, Maria Teresa. I had a huge list of questions that have come through on the Q&A, and unfortunately I don't think we're going to get time to go through. The time has been so limited today, but I really would like to thank you all for your inputs today, and conscious, Maria, congratulations again on the prize that you will be receiving in the next couple of days, and conscious that you are there, holding the line as well. So it's very inspiring talking with all of you today, and hearing the sort of resilience and the energy that comes from doing this sort of very impactful work. Laurent, if you would like to say anything just to close out, given it's Forbidden Stories panel. Oh, sorry, Laurent.
I just wanted to say thank you and goodbye to all. And just as I think that to survive, I think that to survive locally, we have to think globally. And I think what is happening to Maria Teresa and Rappler is not only a Philippine case or story, and what happened to Proceso and Regina Martinez, it's not only a Mexican case issue. The organized crimes are being more and more global. What is happening in Philippines, it's of course about geopolitics. So we have to answer globally, and so maybe that's the best way to survive locally, I think. And you unmuted, Maria, again.
Indeed. Okay, thank you all very, very much, and thank you very much to all our participants, to all our people watching across the globe. Apologies we didn't get to more questions, but the panelists had a lot of very interesting inputs to make in the course of this conversation, so I hope you all found it helpful, and thank you all very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Maria.
you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you all. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.